Obese girl's own mother put her up for sale mountain. Man bought her and built an empire just for her. I will not feed this useless cow any longer. Margaret Ashworth's voice rang through the marketplace like the crack of a whip. On a blistering summer afternoon in 1890, the town of Millbrook witnessed a spectacle so appalling that even the most hardened men shifted uncomfortably. Cordelia Cora Ashworth, 25 years old and weighing more than 340 pounds, was forced to stand on a wooden auction block put there not by strangers, not by enemies, but by her own mother. Margaret, draped in silks and jewels, sneered at her daughter as if she were no more than a sack of spoiled grain. "Who will take her off my hands?" she shouted, fanning herself with disdain. "A strong body, fit for scrubbing floors or hauling water. Starting bid, $100. The crowd erupted into cruel laughter. Some men jeered, tossing out mock offers of a chicken or a jug of whiskey. Women whispered behind their fans, shaking their heads in pity or scorn. Cora's round cheeks were streaked with tears, but Margaret hissed at her to smile, to show herself properly. Humiliated, trembling, Cora managed a broken smile, but her eyes betrayed her despair. She knew in that moment that her mother's greed had stripped her of the last shred of dignity she possessed. And then it happened. From the back of the crowd came a voice that silenced the laughter. Deep, commanding, unyielding. $50,000! Gasps rippled through the square. The crowd parted, and a giant of a man strode forward, his long black hair streaked with silver, his shoulders as broad as a bear's. In his hand he carried a small iron-bound chest, heavy with gold. "I'll take her," he said, locking eyes with Cora. "Not as a servant, as my queen." Cora Ashworth had never known kindness from the woman who bore her. From the day she turned 13, her mother began calling her a disgrace to the Ashworth name. While other young women of Millbrook attended socials and church suppers in lace dresses, Cora was hidden in the back of the house, made to cook and scrub until her hands cracked. Her father had been her only protector, the only one who ever told her she was bright, gentle, and deserving of love. But when a sudden fever took him to the grave the winter before, Margaret's cruelty became boundless. To Margaret, Cora was a liability too large to marry, too soft-hearted to be useful, and too visible a reminder of the imperfection she despised. That morning, Margaret had dragged her daughter from her room and shoved her into a plain cotton dress that clung unflatteringly to her figure. "Stand tall," she ordered coldly. "If you can fetch $100, at least you'll have some use in this world." Now, standing on the block beneath the scorching sun, Cora felt like an animal at market. The heat soaked through her skin, sweat beading on her brow. She kept her eyes fixed on the wooden planks at her feet, unable to face the mocking eyes of the townsfolk. $50! One drunk miner bellowed, followed by laughter. "I'll give 20 she can plow my fields better than any mule," shouted another. The words pierced her like arrows, each sharper than the last. Her hands trembled at her sides. She prayed silently for the earth to open and swallow her whole. And then silence. The moment Zephyr Ironwolf's voice thundered through the crowd, the entire square stilled. All eyes turned to him as he pushed forward, his height towering over every man present. His skin bore the bronze hue of Cherokee blood, while his steel-gray eyes carried the storm of his German heritage. His presence was not merely seen but felt, as though the ground itself steadied beneath his boots. $50,000, he repeated, each word deliberate, undeniable. In gold. Gasps filled the air. No one in Millbrook had ever seen such wealth change hands in a single breath. Margaret's painted lips parted in shock, greed flickering in her eyes. She stammered, "50,000? For her?" Zeph strode forward, carrying an iron-bound chest that clinked with the unmistakable weight of coin. He set it down with a resounding thud upon the auctioneer's stand. "Count it, if you doubt me. But hear this, she will not be your burden any longer. She is mine." For the first time that day, Cora lifted her gaze. Their eyes met her watery blue ones, brimming with disbelief, his storm gray steady and unyielding. He did not look at her body as the others had, with ridicule or disgust. He looked at her as though she were a crown jewel he'd sought his whole life. The crowd broke into murmurs. Some muttered that Iron Wolf had lost his senses. Others whispered about his rumored empire in the mountains. Children gawked at the chest of gold, while the men shifted uneasily under Zeph's gaze. Margaret, her greed overcoming her shock, seized the pen and signed the bill of sale as if selling livestock. She shoved Cora forward toward Zeph with a cruel smirk. "She's yours now. Good luck." Zeph ignored her. With a gentleness that stunned everyone, he took off his heavy fur-lined cloak and draped it across Cora's trembling shoulders. "Come," he said softly. "You will never stand on a block again, not while I draw breath." Cora's knees nearly buckled. For the first time in her life, someone had spoken of her not as a shame, not as a weight, but as someone worth protecting. The wagon that carried Cora away from Millbrook was unlike anything she had ever seen. It was not the creaking, rickety kind that farmers used to haul grain, but a custom-built carriage reinforced with iron and lined inside with velvet cushions and fur blankets. The wheels rolled silently over the dirt road, the suspension so smooth that Cora almost felt as though she were gliding. Zeph rode beside her, one massive hand holding the reins, the other resting easily on his thigh. Two mounted riders in leather and steel, men who clearly served him, flanked the wagon, their rifles glinting in the sunlight. Behind them came a second cart carrying trunks of supplies, food, tools, and luxuries. It looked less like an escape and more like a royal procession. Cora sat stiffly, her hands clutched in her lap. She could still hear the laughter of the crowd echoing in her ears, the sting of her mother's voice calling her a burden. Every jolt of the road felt like a reminder that she no longer belonged anywhere. She had been sold like an object, not a daughter. At last she whispered, her voice barely audible over the creak of the harnesses, "Why?" Zeph turned his head. "Why what? Why did you pay so much?" she asked, staring at her trembling fingers. "Why would a man like you give $50,000 for me?" The word "me" broke in her throat, as though it carried all the shame she had endured. Zeph's storm-gray eyes lingered on her for a moment before he answered, "Because no one else saw what I saw." She frowned, confused. "And what is that?" "A queen," he said simply. Her breath caught, and she shook her head violently. "No, you don't understand. I'm not. Look at me. People mock me in the street. I'm too large, too plain, even my own mother." Her voice cracked and fell away. Zeph clicked the reins softly, guiding the horses around a bend in the trail. His voice was low, steady, like thunder far away. "Your mother is blind. The townsfolk are blind. They measure worth by bones and silk dresses. I measure it by spirit, and your spirit." He glanced at her again. It survived cruelty that would have broken most men. For the first time, Cora could not find words. The silence stretched between them, filled only by the rhythm of hooves striking dirt and the whisper of wind through the pines. That night they camped beside a rushing stream at the edge of the forest. Instead of leaving her to fend for herself, Zeph's men pitched a tent lined with fur. A fire was built high, and one of the guards roasted venison, while another fetched fresh water. Zeph handed Cora a carved wooden bowl of stew, still steaming, and a chunk of warm bread. She stared down at it, astonished. Never in her life had food been given to her first. At home, she had always eaten last cold scraps. Whatever remained after her mother and cousins were satisfied. "Eat," Zeph said gently. Her hand shook as she lifted the spoon. The broth was rich, flavored with herbs she couldn't name, the venison tender and savory. She closed her eyes, and for a moment tears threatened to fall, not from sorrow, but from the strange, aching warmth of being cared for. Zeph sat across from her, silent, watching the fire. He ate slowly, as though there were no hurry in the world. Cora found herself studying him, the breadth of his shoulders, the scars that traced along his jawline, the quiet strength in the way he sat. He was unlike any man she had known, neither cruel nor mocking, neither greedy nor insincere. When she finally dared to speak, her voice trembled. "You said I was a queen, but queens don't cry like frightened children." Zeph's eyes lifted to hers, and in the firelight they burned like molten steel. "Queens are human. They bleed, they weep, and still they rise. That is why they are queens." The words struck something deep within her, something long buried beneath years of humiliation. For the first time, she felt a flicker of belief so small she hardly dared to name it, that perhaps she could be more than what her mother had called her. Over the next days, the procession wound higher into the mountains. The air grew cooler, the pines taller, and the sound of civilization faded behind them. Each evening, Zeph saw to her comfort before his own, making sure her blankets were warm, her feet rested, her hunger eased. He never touched her without asking, never spoke to her with anything but respect. Cora began to notice small things, how he always walked closest to the cliff's edge, shielding her from danger. How he slowed the pace of the wagon when the road grew steep, though she knew he could have urged the horses faster. How he listened, not just with his ears, but with his whole attention whenever she spoke, even about little things like constellations she had studied as a child. By the time they reached the pass that overlooked Zeph's hidden domain, the seed of trust had taken root in her heart. She still did not understand why he had chosen her, but for the first time in her life she no longer felt like a burden to be carried. She felt just barely like someone who mattered, and as the valley opened before her eyes, sprawling with the promise of something vast and unseen, she wondered if she was about to step into a life that was nothing like the one she had been told she deserved. When the last ridge fell away and the valley spread out beneath them, Cora gasped aloud. She had expected a solitary cabin perched against the cliffside, some crude lodge with smoke curling from its chimney. What she saw instead made her grip the side of the carriage until her knuckles turned white. Below them stretched an entire hidden domain, like a secret kingdom carved into the heart of the mountains. A river glittered in the sunlight, winding through fields of green. Orchards swayed in the breeze. Wooden mills turned slowly on the water's edge, and in the center, rising from stone foundations older than memory, stood a castle. It wasn't the cold fortress of her imagination. It was built from granite and timber, its high towers softened with ivy, its balconies strung with flowers. Smoke drifted lazily from tall chimneys. Windows caught the light like mirrors, flashing gold. She could hear the faint toll of a bell tower echoing against the cliffs. Cora pressed her hand to her mouth. "This is yours?" Zeph's voice was calm, almost matter-of-fact. "Ours now." The word ours rattled through her like a jolt of thunder. The procession descended into the valley, greeted at the gates by men and women who bowed their heads as Zeph passed. Some wore uniforms of polished leather, others simple working clothes, but all looked upon their master with respect rather than fear. Inside the castle, Cora was ushered into a hall that stole her breath away. The floor was polished stone, veined with silver. Tapestries lined the walls depicting not battles, but forests, animals, the rhythms of the land. A chandelier of antlers and crystal hung overhead, glowing with candlelight, and everything, she noticed with growing disbelief, was built to fit her. The chairs were broad and solid, carved from oak with cushions deep enough to hold her comfortably. The bed in her chamber was wide and firm, layered with quilts and fur. Even the staircase had banisters tall enough that she could climb without feeling cramped. It was as if the castle itself had been waiting for her. She turned to Zeph, her throat tight. How could you possibly have known?" His mouth curved in the faintest hint of a smile. "Because I built it with someone like you in mind, someone who deserved more than the world ever gave her." That evening, Cora dined at a table long enough for a king's council, though only the two of them sat at its head. Platters of roasted pheasant, fresh bread, honey, and candied fruits filled the air with sweet aromas. Yet Zeph waited, hands folded, until she had taken her first bite. No one in her life had ever done that before. Her eyes prickled with tears. She lowered her gaze to the golden plate before her, whispering, "I don't know how to live like this." Zeph leaned closer, his voice steady. "Then learn, one day at a time. This is your home now." In the days that followed, Cora wandered the castle in cautious wonder. There was a library with shelves that climbed 3 stories high, ladders sliding along rails to reach the top. A conservatory where roses bloomed even in the harshest winter, warmed by sunlight captured in glass. A music room filled with instruments from across the world, harps, drums, flutes, carved from bone. And there was the observatory, high in the tallest tower, where Zeph had placed a massive brass telescope. The first time he led her there, Cora could hardly breathe. She remembered the books she had devoured in secret as a girl, the nights she had pressed her face to the attic window, yearning to chart the stars. "Show me," Zeph said simply, handing her the telescope's polished brass handle. She adjusted the lens with trembling fingers, and suddenly the heavens spilled before her in perfect clarity. Jupiter, Saturn with its rings, the glittering spray of the Milky Way. She gasped, tears sliding silently down her cheeks. Zeph watched, arms crossed, his face unreadable. But when she finally looked at him, unable to speak, he inclined his head. "It is yours, all of it. I built it, but you will give it meaning." Something inside her shifted. For the first time in her life, she wasn't simply enduring. She was living. Even in the quietest moments, the crackle of the fireplace, the scent of pine smoke drifting through the halls, she felt herself softening, daring to hope. Zeph never pushed, never demanded. He spoke little, But when he did, his words were deliberate, carved in stone. "You are not a servant here," he told her one morning as she tried to gather dishes from the table. His hand, gentle yet firm, covered hers. "You are the mistress of this house. Walk it as such." She pulled her hand back, flustered, her heart hammering. "But I don't know how to be that woman." Zeph's eyes burned into hers. "You will." And somehow she believed him. At night, lying beneath quilts heavy with warmth, Cora would listen to the hush of wind through the valley, the low rumble of thunder beyond the peaks. She thought of her mother's voice, sharp as broken glass, telling her she was nothing but a burden. But then she would remember Zeph's voice instead, calm and certain, telling her she was a queen. For the first time, she began to wonder, perhaps the world had lied to her all along. Cora's days in the Iron Wolf Castle soon settled into a rhythm of quiet wonder. She spent mornings in the conservatory, afternoons in the library, and nights tracing constellations from the observatory tower. Zeph was always near, never smothering, but always steady, and slowly, impossibly, she began to feel safe. But peace in the wilderness rarely lasts. It began with whispers. One afternoon, as she descended the grand staircase, Cora overheard two of Zeph's guards speaking in hushed tones near the entry hall. "They'll come for her, you know," one muttered. The other spat into the fire. "Let them try. They'll find this valley sharper than any court of law." Cora froze, her fingers tightening on the carved banister. "Come for her?" she wanted to ask, but the guards fell silent when they noticed her presence, bowing low as though nothing had been said. That night she pressed the question to Zeph as they dined. "Who is coming? Why are your men uneasy?" Zeph set down his goblet with deliberate calm. For a long time he said nothing. Then at last, "Your mother." The words struck her like a knife. "She squandered the money," Zeph continued, his tone flat. $50,000 burns quickly in greedy hands. Now she claims the sale was unlawful. She has aligned herself with a man named Cornelius Blackwater, wealthy, influential, dangerous. Cora's stomach twisted. She wants me back?" Zeph's gaze caught hers, hard as steel. "She wants what you represent. Through you, she hopes to claim what I have built. She cannot stand that I saw your worth where she saw only shame." Tears threatened, but she forced them back. "All my life, she told me I was a burden, and now suddenly I'm valuable enough to fight for?" His hand reached across the table, covering hers with warmth. "You are not valuable because of me. You are valuable because of you. Do not let her lies chain you again." Yet the storm was already gathering. Within weeks, legal summons arrived at the outer settlements of the Iron Wolf domain. Margaret and Blackwater filed petitions in Denver claiming Cora had been kidnapped and brainwashed. Newspapers took the story, twisting it into lurid headlines. "Mountain warlord buys obese girl for gold. Is this slavery in the Rockies?" Cora read one of the broadsheets by candlelight, her hands shaking. The cruel caricature of her printed on the front page round, clumsy, chained by the wrist to a hulking beast of a man, made her chest burn with shame. "I can't fight this," she whispered, thrusting the paper aside. "They'll never believe me. They never did." Zeph's expression darkened, but his voice remained calm. "Then we will not fight alone." He summoned allies, leaders of the Cherokee tribes who owed him loyalty, merchants whose caravans he had protected, miners whose wages he had safeguarded against Blackwater's schemes. The castle filled with voices, men and women, pledging their allegiance not only to Zeph, but to Cora as well. Still, doubt gnawed at her. What if they were right? What if she truly was nothing more than the burden her mother had called her, and now an entire kingdom risked ruin because Zeph had been foolish enough to believe in her? Late one evening, she wandered to the observatory tower, seeking solace in the stars. Zeph found her there, staring through the telescope with tears clinging to her lashes. "Do you know what you're looking at?" he asked quietly. "The Andromeda Galaxy," she murmured. 2 million light-years away. A place so far from here I could never imagine reaching it." Zeph stepped closer, his presence like a wall of warmth behind her. "And yet you see it. You bring its light into your eyes. That is power, Cora. The power to turn distance into meaning. Do not underestimate it. Do not underestimate yourself." Before she could reply, the bell tower clanged in alarm. Shouts echoed through the halls below. Cora turned, her heart seizing in her chest. Zeph's hand dropped to the hilt of the blade at his side. His jaw tightened. "They've come." Outside the castle walls, torchlight flickered in the night. Scores of men marching up the valley, their banners marked with the sigil of Blackwater, and at their head, dressed in silks even here in the wilderness, rode Margaret Ashworth. Her mother's voice rang across the courtyard like poison on the wind. "Return, my daughter, or I will burn your kingdom to the ground." The valley echoed with the thud of boots and the crackle of torches. Blackwater's mercenaries fanned out before the castle gates, rifles gleaming under the moonlight. Margaret Ashworth rode at their center, her lips curled in triumph, as if she had already claimed victory. Zeph stood atop the battlements, cloak whipping in the wind, his towering frame lit by the firelight below. Beside him, Cora gripped the stone, her heart hammering. "Cordelia!" Margaret's voice carried across the night. "Come down to me this instant. You have been bewitched, sold into degradation. I am your mother, and I demand your return." The crowd of mercenaries jeered, their laughter carrying like the snap of whips. Blackwater raised his cane, his oily smile glinting. "Hand her over, Iron Wolf, or we will storm these walls. And when we do, your so-called empire will crumble." Cora's knees trembled. For a moment, she was 20 again, hearing her mother's hiss in her ear. "You are nothing but a burden, a disgrace, a fat cow unworthy of love." But then she felt Zeph's hand brush hers, grounding her. He didn't speak, but his eyes, steady as mountains, told her everything. "This is your fight, too." Cora straightened. She stepped forward until the moonlight struck her face. Her voice, shaky at first, rose stronger with every word. "I am not a burden. I am not for sale. I am Cordelia Ironwolf, wife of Zeph, mistress of this land, and I will never go with you." A gasp rippled even through the mercenaries. Margaret's face twisted in fury. "You dare defy me?" "For the first time in my life, yes," Cora declared. Her voice rang across the courtyard, filled with years of pain, turned into fire. "You sold me like livestock. You called me a monster. But here," she placed a hand on her chest, "I found love. I found purpose. You cannot take that from me." Blackwater sneered. "Pretty speeches won't stop bullets." He lifted his cane, signaling the attack. But before his men could advance, Zeph's own warriors stepped from the shadows, Cherokee riders on painted horses, miners armed with pickaxes, townsfolk carrying lanterns. They had come because Zeph had defended them, but they stayed because of Cora. The standoff blazed hot, steel and gunpowder poised to ignite. Then Zeph's voice cut through like thunder. You threaten what is mine, Blackwater. You threaten who is hers. But understand this Iron Wolf land does not bend, not to gold, not to fear, and not to tyrants. The gates creaked open. Zeph strode down, sword at his hip, rifle slung across his back. He walked straight into the firelight, daring them to strike. The mercenaries hesitated. Against his size, his calm, his legend, their courage faltered. And when Cora descended the steps to stand at his side, shoulders squared, chin lifted high, the hesitation cracked into fear. For the first time, Margaret saw not the daughter she had despised, but a queen she could never control. You've lost, Cora said simply. The night held its breath. Then, like wolves melting into the dark, Blackwater's men broke. One by one, torches fell to the ground, footsteps retreating into the trees. Blackwater cursed, dragged down from his horse by Zeph's allies. Margaret screamed, her voice shrill and desperate, but no one followed her command. The castle gates shut behind them. Silence returned to the valley, broken only by the rustle of leaves. Cora turned to Zeph, her eyes wet but unyielding. For the first time, I fought back. Zeph's hand cupped her cheek, his voice low. And for the first time, you saw who you truly are. The valley lay hushed after the storm, its silence deep as snow. The torches of Blackwater's men were nothing but smoldering embers now, scattered across the dirt. Inside the castle, the great hall glowed with firelight, shadows dancing across the carved beams. Cora sat at the long oak table, her hands still trembling from the confrontation. She had stood before her mother, before an army, and spoken words she never thought her voice could carry. A strange, fierce calm settled over her now like a fire-banked, but still alive. Zeph entered, his heavy boots silent on the stone. He set his rifle against the wall, then poured 2 cups of spiced cider from the kettle on the hearth. Without a word, he placed one before her and sat at her side. For a long moment, neither spoke. The crackle of the fire and the whisper of wind through the valley filled the silence. Finally, Zeph's deep voice rumbled low. "You're safe here." Cora swallowed hard, her eyes stinging. No one had ever spoken those words to her before. Safe, not mocked, not despised. Safe. She turned, finding his gaze steady, unwavering. "And this is my home now, if I choose it?" Zeph inclined his head once. "If you'll have it." Tears slipped free, but this time they weren't of sorrow. She reached for his hand, strong and scarred, and he closed it around hers, warm as the fire beside them. Outside, the mountains loomed eternal, keeping their secrets. Inside, a woman who had been treated as nothing began to believe she might truly be everything. And though the battle had ended, one question lingered in the air like the echo of thunder. Would their love be strong enough to hold against the world beyond the valley? Every time I share stories like this, I'm reminded how love and resilience can grow even in the harshest places. These tales aren't just about the Old West. They're about every one of us who's ever been judged, doubted, or underestimated. I'd love to know, where in the world are you listening from? Drop a comment and tell me. And if you still believe in love that defies every cruelty and every storm, then stay with me. The next story is already waiting for you.